Alright, so we're back. And I wanted to finish talking about making like holes in the ground. So once you do that, you get these props here. And here we go, earth cliff. This is a useful one, but there's also other ones you can use. They're all in the rocks section, so just check that out in there. But you want to fit these into place and create like tunnels and stuff. Now, you might have issues with like clipping where you can see underneath from inside, like right here. So you don't want that. You want to always fill in these spaces with things like rocks and stuff. Make sure that you can't see underneath the ground. And so, with that finished up here, let's get into the more advanced techniques to kind of finish this map out in terms of like making it a functional map. Obviously, this isn't going to be like a real map. This is just showing you the ropes. So let's start with the main objectives. So let's see, we're going to find those in capture points. Home spawn area right here. And place it here. And so let's go ahead and call this British Main. And make sure that this variation 1 right here is the proper team. So for British it's going to be 2. And for any Entente it's going to be 2. And then Central Powers is going to be 1. So let's spawn another main on the opposite side. Bada boom. German main. Make it 1 for Central Powers. And there you go. So now we have some main objectives. Now, we still have to set spawn points for the mains and also all of the actual capture points. But we're going to get into that later. Let's finish making the rest of the cap zones, and then we're also going to talk about borders. So, talking about borders, there's going to be an other. It's only player collider right here. And these always come as just a cube. But you want to size them big, of course, to make them like a wall. And you want to have these going underneath the ground a bit so that people can't dig underneath them. But that's how you make border walls. So if you want to shrink your map down to whatever size, you just make the border walls with these. And then the area past the border wall, people can actually get out there with mobile spawn points, engineer spawn points. So in order to mitigate that, you're going to have to create some kind of death zone out here. Now, there is actually a instant death zone right here, but in terms of when I'm making this video, it might get fixed in the future, but when I'm making this video right now, this instant death zone does not work when I tested it. It doesn't work. Maybe it works now, but it doesn't work when I tested it. So what I used instead was the burn zone, which I think it's like fire damage or something. Yeah, fire damage zone right here. And so you want to obviously expand these cubes out to be like the size of the outside area, the outside the border area. And so then if you actually do manage to get out, you'll get killed by the fire zone. And it kills you really fast, so you don't have time to mess around or make another spawn or anything like that. You'll just die. So that is helpful information for that. And then to make the actual colliders, those are in capture points, if I remember right. Capture point colliders. So you want to put these, you want to make these like big walls as well. Also going underneath the ground. And these will be the walls that will prevent players from crossing, like basically from, it's the wall that you run into like during the pre-round to prevent you from like crossing the map or crossing outside of your spawn area. So those are very important. You want to make those, big walls and have those in between the mains and the objectives. And so that way, you can also make them faction specific with these as well. And if you make a faction specific, make sure to have 2 sets in between each one. And so that's especially helpful with the linear objectives, which we're going to do for this map because it's not as straightforward as the conquest. But yeah, so very, very important right there. And make sure that these go all the way across. I was just spawning one to show you an example, but have them go all the way across the map. Just do the old copy-paste method if you can't make them long enough. And so, yeah, for the next thing, I think we'll get into the actual objectives. And so this is a little weird, but there's only actually one. There's one that actually works, and there's only one that you should actually use here. So yeah, only use this one right here. Don't use any other type of points. It has kind of a default size, but you can stretch this to whatever size you want for your particular map. So let's just put it right here. You generally want to have the objectives be about 70 to 100 meters away from each other, just so that there's enough space for people to actually spawn and maneuver and stuff. Of course, there's always exceptions to every rule. And then for these, you want to mess with the variation IDs. If you're doing a conquest map, then if you make these neutral, then basically whoever's the defending team, they will be the one to control it. And you can't change that. There's always going to be an attacking and defending team. So if you make it neutral, just keep that in mind. The defending team is going to own it. Otherwise, you can actually make the objectives team specific. So if you wanted the game to start out with both sides controlling the same objectives, same amount of objectives. If you had 4 objectives, you wanted each team to control 2, then you can set that here and have it start out with a certain team holding a certain objective. So depending on the map that you're doing and how you want the kind of flow to work, that is also an important factor. And so I don't think we really need to place all the objectives out here, but every objective has a linking ID, and you have to make sure that when you place your spawn points that they're linked to this number. You want to make sure that in their variation IDs it's the same number. Because otherwise, if you're trying to spawn on, let's say you're trying to spawn on a main, but the variation ID for your main is on some spawn point that's over here, then when you're trying to spawn on the main, you'll spawn over here instead. So, don't want that. But let's go ahead and just make a few more, just so we can kind of round out the map, I guess. And so, of course, you want to rename these to, whatever. Points. Blah, blah, blah. I didn't spell point right. But yeah. So after that, you probably want to get into. So going back to our cap points here. Going back to our cap points, there is one here that determines the order in which they are capped. So right here. So you want to have this be from the German side. So I have German spawn right over here, right? So I want to have, so Germany will always attack 1 first. So I want to set this right here, the order. I want to set this to 1. And then for the next objective here, of course, we're going to set that to 2. And then for the next objective, Set that to 3, okay? And that is important because Britain will always attack 3 first. Well, sorry, Britain will always attack the highest number first, I should say that. Britain will always attack the highest number first, and then Germany will always attack the lowest number first. So make sure to set that order. I'd probably get into the actual spawn points. So, a couple options here, but the only one you really have to worry about, well, the only one you have to worry about, is the spawn point infantry right here. So, we need to, if we need to connect a spawn to our main, it will actually automatically link to whatever the closest main or cap point is. You want to have these just sunk into the ground a little bit. A few things you can change here. You can actually make these spawn points faction specific. The variation IDs, let's see here. Yeah, right here. So you can, if it's -1 or if it's 3, that's neutral. So whoever's spawning on the objective, whatever objective it is, if it's -1 or 3, then it will be either team. Either team will spawn on it. Doesn't matter. Whoever controls the objective will spawn on it. But if you make it faction specific, then let's say I was making some spawns over here for this objective. I can have the Entente spawns on their side when they're controlling it, and then have the Central Powers spawns on the Central Powers side. And that is important for the linear objectives, which we talked about in the last video, how to make a match linear or conquest. So for the linear games, you want to first make sure that the objectives themselves are all neutral. That's how it always works. They always have to be neutral, so always make those a 3. And then you also want to make the spawns faction specific. So you want to change this variation 5 on the spawns to either Central Powers or Entente, and have them be on their respective sides, because that will determine the flow of the game. If you don't do that, then you'll have all of the spawns in one location, or in the, and it kind of ruins the flow of the game, because either side can attack or defend either direction. So that's why you kind of want to make the flow proper by putting the spawns on their respective sides. Speaking of spawns, you want to a lot of times make the spawns either in like a deep trench or in like a deep shell hole, or somewhere that's out of view and in the ground, or you want to just make a full-blown spawn bunker, which is what pretty much all of the vanilla maps have for most of their main objective spawns. Most of them are underground, and when you're doing that, like the one I was showing you over here, when you're doing that, you want to actually create a spawn protection zone. So spawn protection zone is right here, and so you want to stretch this out to basically cover not only the spawn itself, but a little bit outside of the spawn, so that people can't just linger by the entrance and spawn kill people. So you can use those, and you can also use these call-in protection zones, but these call-in protection zones you only want to use for the mains, because you are supposed to be able to call stuff in on the actual objectives, but you want to use those for the mains so that people can't call in stuff and spawn camp people on their own mains. So that is something to note as well right there, and that's going to be in the capture points category. Okay, moving on. So we should probably talk about bots and bot stuff. So two main things that you want to take away from that. Mainly, it's the bots will of course spawn on the spawn points that you lay down, and you want to have a dozen or so or more spawn points. And speaking of the spawns, there's a lot of stuff in the variation IDs they want to look out for. There's one that determines the height at which NPCs will spawn. And that one is important for spawning people underground, because if you don't set that at a low number, then they'll spawn on the roof instead of spawning underground. So that is something to look out for. And then, oh yeah, this one right here, variation 2. This will determine how many people will spawn on it, and you want to actually put this number pretty low. It's default 20, but you want to make it low. I made mine like 1 or 2 for my spawns. The reason why you do that is because you don't want a bunch of like bots piling up on each other and doing big conga lines. And spreading the spawns out and making that number low is a good way to spread out the bots and prevent that from happening. And speaking of that, let's get into the bot stuff. So for the bot stuff, we got the garrison points right here. So garrison points are basically like little nodes that the bots will gravitate towards, and they will either like stand or crouch depending on the type of garrison point. Typically they'll move to the node and then they'll like linger there for a little bit and then they'll move on. Or if they're defending a point and the garrison spot is on a point, then they'll typically defend it. So here we go, the garrison spots. You see a few of them here. So the crouching one, of course, makes them crouch when they get to the node. This one, the neutral random variant, is for just like every team on every setting of every map, or like attacking or defending on either team. So this one's for kind of generic ones that are, I typically put these like in between the points and kind of just normal cover areas. You want to typically put these garrison points in areas where bots will want to take cover, like natural areas of cover on your map. And so this will help the bots like spread out and act a little bit more like players, act a little bit more intelligent. And you do have to actually, they will automatically link to the nearest point when you set them down, but you have to link them here to a specific objective unless they're the neutral ones. So these ones don't really matter, but for the random, which will be either, the random one will be either standing or crouching, and then of course there's specifically standing or crouching right here. And so these are useful for when you have like a trench and you want the bots to specifically stand or crouch in a certain trench to make them look like they're peeking at the proper level. The random ones are just for areas that it doesn't matter. You can have a little variation. And so these ones especially, like the random, the standing and the crouching, you want to have linked to specific objectives. And so like I said, put them in areas where bots should take cover, and that will make them act a lot more natural. And then speaking of that, we have the high cost and low cost zones. So this you can kind of stretch out, and this will be basically an area where bots will walk and they'll gravitate towards walking through. And so it's especially useful if you notice the bots are not going where they should be going and you want to kind of force them a certain direction. You can set a few of these down, and it's good to have like multiple ones connected to each other. And you can basically guide the bots in a certain path by using these, especially if they're not behaving correctly. This is kind of a behavior correction for the bots. And then the high cost zones, those are basically do the opposite, where instead of the bots gravitating towards them, they'll actually avoid these. So this is especially useful if you have like an area that bots are, walking off of a cliff, or they're walking into a barbed wire that you set down or something like that. You want to have these high cost zones so that the bots stay away from them. And of course you can stretch these out to whatever size. Okay, let me think of what else we need to cover here. Okay, well, I can't think of anything else that I really need to cover for like making a map functional. I think I covered all the basics. Best thing to do, once again, is to either look at the vanilla maps in the editor, or look at the highest rated workshop maps. Those are good to draw from for how to make a map proper. And so we're going to just look at one of those maps real quick, and we're going to kind of look at all the stuff that I covered and see how it's applied into an actual map. So as an example here, this is the highest rated workshop map, which is called Lochnagar Crater. So this has all of the elements to kind of look at here. So as you can see, these orange big walls here are the borders. You can see how they're set up in such a way where, regardless of the settings, it will always be blocking the factions from being able to get out of those point areas. We got the high cost zones right here, covering the barbed wire areas where bots shouldn't wander. And then you can see the low cost zones connected to each other. Going through, areas like the barbed wire fence. You can also see the low cost zones are inside of the actual trenches also. And that helps bots not stand on top of the trenches. There's also the garrison points at areas where bots would stand, like at the parapet. Other examples here. And then we got the actual objectives, which, as you can see, are sunk into the ground here. And actually, yeah, when you sink the objectives into the ground, you want to make sure that they're sitting on something. So you actually have to place one of these here, and I'll show you here in the variation IDs. It's called floor block house, and you'll find it in the wall category. But you don't have to use this specific floor. I think any floor works, but these are the ones here that were used on this map, and that makes it so the objectives will actually sit underground. And that's useful for if you're making the objective like a trench like this, or if you're doing like anything that's really underground. You want to make sure that the objective itself is actually sitting on something, and you can make it a pretty small wall, but it has to be like kind of in the center of the point for it to like rest on it properly. So that is something to note. You can see some spawn points down here inside of this deep crater. You can see the garrison points in some of the craters as well as pieces of cover. You want to always put those in like pieces of cover. This map has a really big underground area over here. As you can see here, there are death zones that were placed on top of the underground section, so that if anyone did happen to spawn up there or get up there in somehow, they would just die. You can see there's low cost zones inside of the actual tunnel, and you can see that these tunnel walls are made out of those props, those dirt props, and then there was just other props added to it to make it look like a proper tunnel. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers all of it. But yeah, you want to always make like a good amount of spawn points. Even on conquest maps, honestly, it's not a bad idea to make the spawns like it's not a bad idea to make them faction specific, because a lot of times that can kind of direct the flow in a certain way that you want it to go. But yeah, I think that covers everything. I'm probably gonna have to like add some notes later about things I forgot about. But I think that covers everything that you need to know about making a map. I think I already talked about vehicles. They're in the cannon section. Yeah. So yeah, best of luck, map makers, and that's how you do it.